Hi there. Welcome to the first premiere of Whitemailing, the first audio story. If you're not really interested in intros, don't worry, I'm going to make this short. You'll notice that I actually uploaded chapters 1 and 2 of this some time ago. The reason that I am re-uploading them now is because I have kind of thought of some reasons as to why I should. 4 reasons. First reason is I had the flu when I made the first 2 chapters of this, so I decided that, well, I kind of want to be healthy and I want to try them again so I can do them better. Second reason is I feel like there's a lot of stuff in the story that was kind of pointless, unnecessary. So I kept all the details of the mannerisms of the characters and the intricacies of all the things that they actually do, their actions, the way they talk, all that. But I took out some unnecessary things like describing how their clothing looks. I feel like that's completely unnecessary. If you really want to imagine these characters, you are more than capable of figuring out what you think they should wear. The third reason is I made a separate document for a read-along. It will be chapters 1, 2, 3, whichever chapter we're on, it's going to be a document of just that chapter. So you can read along with me in a separate document, or you can react with everyone else in the live chat. The fourth reason is, in my opinion, the most important. After reviewing the things that are actually in this story, I have come to a sort of decision that I need to post I'll just say it, a trigger warning. So at the start of every single episode, I'm going to be putting a disclaimer. I'm not going to be saying what's in that exact chapter due to spoilers of the people who are able to take that risk and able to handle the material. I don't want to say exactly what's going to go on in each chapter. However, I do want to give a broad warning as to what could go on at any time. So, right after this announcement is over, this little intro, you are going to see the trigger warning. This will appear at the start of every single episode. And once again, there will be no intro before the trigger warning on any of the other chapters. So if you don't care for this, don't worry. This is the only one. So, let's get started. Warning. The story you are about to read and or listen to has a series of potentially triggering and controversial topics, as well as events taking place. I will list them now. Child abuse, substance abuse, implied sexual abuse, bullying, self-harm, suicidal thoughts and tendencies, and potentially more as the story progresses. If you may feel uncomfortable by these things, no one will judge you if you click off of this video. If you accept the risk and want to experience the story for what it is, then I invite you to enjoy this chapter of Whitemailing. Thank you. Final disclaimer. I do not make light of these topics, nor do I find them to be tools for shock value. I do consider them very real events that happen daily. Therefore, they should not be barred from being in a story to give it a more real feeling. I do not hope to make light of these things, only to draw attention to them. Please enjoy the show. Chapter 1. Her smile could not be swayed by the dull gray Tuesday morning. She was always smiling. She couldn't really help it. She tried countless times to work on it, but always found herself questioning why. Why intentionally stop smiling? That made no sense to her. Besides, it was the start of her 9th year in Tetherwood, and as usual, she would undoubtedly be the class president for the 6th year in a row. Tetherwood was unlike most schools. Instead of being like general grade schools separated by elementary, junior high, and high school, it was all one academy with a large campus full of buildings. The grading scale went from first year all the way to 12th, perfectly emulating the tried and true grading scale that the United States had already been famous for. Tetherwood was located near Vermilion, South Dakota, and was generally forgotten because of the primary education facility, University of South Dakota. It was well hidden to the public eye, it being a private school. There were only 2 kinds of children that went to Tetherwood. One were all the good kids, much like herself. They were invited to go for no charge in order to bring a more positive influence to Tetherwood's primary demographic, which were the delinquents. It was often considered a school for bad kids, so even though many children were offered to go there for free,
The offer was generally turned down because of the publicity and reputation that would inevitably draw themselves. She was not one of such children, though. Her mother happily accepted the invitation before the start of her first year, so she was already an 8th-year veteran. There were a few people that had been there as long as she had, and she still had years to go. Her name was Juniper Reese, and she was 15 years old and was beginning her 9th year this day. She was short for her age, only standing at a minuscule 5'0". Her dirty blonde hair was always in a messy pixie cut, and this year was no different. She carried her leather bag over her shoulder, thinking about the day, who'd she be in class with, who her teacher was. Juniper decided not to think about it and let the excitement grow further so it would be a greater surprise. She adored surprises. She adored everything positive and fun. She was easily one of the most liked people at the school because of her bubbly and happy-go-lucky personality, but this also meant she was quite the pushover. She was popular with the guys because of her loving personality, cute stature, and pale blue eyes, but she preferred to keep her distance beyond that. She was self-conscious about many things. Her teeth were crooked, even after braces, and she even had a slight snaggletooth on the left side. There was also the fact that her breasts were nearly paper flat, and she felt inferior to many girls because of this. Because of her flat chest and short hair, the only thing that really said that she was a girl was her usual makeup and wide hips. Besides those attributes, though, she would have just be considered a really short boy. Juniper's uniform was her first semester one, of course. She wore a red plaid skirt that came up just above the knees with knee-high black socks and brown loafers. She wore a white button-up with a forest green ribbon around the collar, the color of 9th years. She wore a black silk jacket over the button-up that only buttoned halfway up her chest, perfectly displaying the ribbon that she hated so much. But it was the uniform. Nothing she could really do about it. She saw a large crowd just outside the north building, which was going to be the building she would be inside from now until now. The south building was for the 1st and 4th years, the west building was for the 5th through 8th years, and the north building was the 9th through 12th years. She was excited. She'd never even been inside the building before. She eased through the crowd rather easily. Her size didn't help her much, but because of her popularity around the school, people saw her and let her in without much of a fuss. Even the delinquents of the school liked her, so if anyone messed with her, they'd likely step in. Juniper read the board to find her year. When she found the 9th year, she looked under each teacher and quickly skimmed to the R's. She finally found her name with an estimate of 20 or so kids in the class. She was in a class with a teacher named Miss Higgins. She smiled and rushed inside. She went up to the stairs to the 2nd floor, looking for room 204. She found it and walked inside. There weren't many kids inside. The teacher was there, with her name written neatly on the board. Miss Higgins was younger than previously expected, but her stature and the look on her face was that of a grizzled old woman, definitely odd for a woman that looked to be in her 30s. Juniper scanned the room for anyone else she knew, and the 6 kids that were there were unknown to her. She shrugged and took her seat. She began opening her bag and organizing all of her new binders and clean notepads that she adored purchasing at the start of each year. Unlike most children, Juniper did her own school shopping, using money she acquired from volunteering at local family-owned business stores around her neighborhood. She adored the thrill of getting brightly colored and patterned notebooks and binders, along with perfectly yellow No. 2 pencils. She was the definition of a neat freak.
"I knew she'd be in here before us," a lower female voice said. "She's always early."
Juniper looked up to see a familiar face. She smiled brightly at them, unable to hide her teeth. It was Noelle Fisher, a very pretty brunette girl that stood quite a few inches over Juniper. Noelle was, without a doubt, Juniper's best friend. They were a perfectly complementary pair. Juniper was always so straightforward and innocent, while Noelle could be crude yet extremely mature. Behind her was one of the more popular boys in the school. Like Juniper and Noelle, he was sent to Tetherwood to try to positively influence the delinquents around the school. He didn't particularly like the idea at first, but once he found out his best friend all those years ago was headed there, he couldn't refuse. His name was Ben Crafting. He had light auburn hair, perfectly brushed along his eyebrows, his eyes behind thin-framed glasses. He was very handsome, and one of the kindest and most logical people in the entire academy. Juniper and Ben weren't as close as she was to Noelle, but they got along great considering they were two of the most polite people in school.
I didn't check any of the names besides mine. I wanted it to be a surprise to I was in a class with, Juniper said shyly. Sorry I didn't wait up.
Noelle smiled.
You'd apologize for breathing if you thought it'd be an inconvenience to someone else. Don't be sorry, goof.
Juniper turned to Ben and waved. He nodded back and smiled. It's going to be close this year, Ben said smoothly. We've never been in the same class together, and we've always been elected class president. Though this year, there can only be one. Juniper raised her fist passionately and grinned devilishly.
And that's me, she said with confidence. I'm not going to let you break my record, so don't expect anything other than a silver medal.
Ben smiled again, his teeth revealing. We'll see. And hey, if you do win, you can show me a thing or two about running a class.
A thing or two? Juniper said sarcastically. Please, I'd be surprised if I could show you anything. Your classes have always had such a perfect behavior rating. Except the years you were with, you know.
Ben nodded, looking corrected. Well, maybe you could show me how it's done then. Juniper squinted, confused.
Huh?
The door shut to the room and all the seats, a select few, had been filled. 22 kids were in the class with 25 seats, so there were bound to be missing a few. 5 rows and 5 columns of seats across the room. The only seats that weren't taken was the one in the very front to the left, the very front on the right, and the desk that was to the right of Juniper, and back one. She was perfectly in the very middle of the room. Miss Higgins approached the front of the room and spoke in a very soft voice.
Good morning, guys. I'm gonna be your teacher this year, so let's all try to get along and have fun. First things first, I'm going to take roll. Hannah Albert? Here. Okay, she said while writing. Jacob Bryant?
Present.
Ben Crafting?
Here, ma'am.
I love the ma'am, thank you, she said, grinning. Wes Duffy?
Here. She scrolled through the names for a while, and Juniper tuned her out for a short while, as she knew it would be a short while before her name was called. She began organizing her folders and notebooks, writing her name on them with a Sharpie that was hooked to her bag. She brought everything to class that she needed, supplies to do everything, and everything required to be in a classroom.
Will Pryor?
Here. Juniper knew that she was next, so she stopped organizing and paid attention to the next name. She knew that announcing your presence was a very big first impression, so she needed to be ready, just like every year. The teacher stopped writing and read the next name.
Kyler Queen?
The room went black and white. Juniper stiffened. It felt like the entire room stiffened. Ben straightened his glasses, but it looked more like an excuse to put his head down. There was not a single name in the entire school that Juniper wanted called less than Kyler Queen's. Kyler was without a doubt the worst delinquent in the school, and second place was not close. No one showed up late, ignored the teacher, got into fights, and was a general pain in the ass more than Kyler Queen.
Okay, looks like Juniper Reese isn't here either. Oh, no, I'm here. Sorry, I was organizing. I'm here, ma'am.
The teacher smiled.
That's okay. Just, try to pay closer attention.
Juniper slumped. Not only was Kyler Queen in her class, but now her first impression was severely shot. It wouldn't get much worse than this. Then the door opened to the room, and it did. Juniper looked up to see a very unpleasant sight. It was Kyler. Kyler was a boy of average height and build, around 5'10". He looked like the most unfriendly person you could ever see, and his personality wasn't much better. He had a black piercing in his left ear, and there was a small scar-like slit that ran through his left eyebrow. His hair was long and dark, easily able to cover up his eyes if he didn't brush it downward, instead of the side of his face. His uniform, of course, was wrong. Just by looking at him, you could tell he either didn't care or was intentionally trying to piss people off. He slowly walked to a seat that was to the right of Juniper and sat down. He threw his bag to the floor and put on his pair of headphones that were around the collars over his ears and leaned back in his chair. Miss Higgins marked Kyler present and didn't even bother making him late. She knew Kyler enough, and she had heard plenty of stories. Juniper had him in her class only once, and that was 3 years ago, but he was a mess. He was completely uncooperative, and it almost seemed like every chance he got he intentionally pissed her off. Juniper used to let it slide after hearing about the passing of his mother, knowing that could make him very angry and hurt. But the time came one day where it just wasn't acceptable anymore. To that day, Kyler never changed his attitude. He was still the same hard-ass that Juniper met 8 years ago, when he was put in a completely different class. When she had him in her class 3 years prior, she was happy, hoping that she could maybe turn him around, but she tried so much over the year that it seemed to everyone else he was the only one she really concerned herself with. If there were 2 people in the entire school that truly hated each other, it was Kyler and Juniper. Juniper hated Kyler because of his lack of caring and neglectance to try to change his outlook, and Kyler hated Juniper because she was pushy and annoying as can be. Juniper was usually so tolerant of people, but Kyler brought out the worst in her. Miss Higgins spoke up.
So, Kyler, have any trouble finding the room?
Kyler looked up, his emerald green eyes finally showing themselves. He scowled immediately and turned up the volume on his headphones. Juniper knew there had to be something that she could do to fix him this year. She couldn't just let him be a jerk. She had to teach him a lesson. For the next several minutes, the class talked about themselves as an introduction. When they finally got to Kyler, he offered no surprise to anyone, and just kept quiet, his music playing through his headphones.
Okay then, nice to meet you too, Miss Higgins said jokingly. Juniper Reese?
Juniper stopped glaring at Kyler and stood. Kyler suddenly sighed, and Juniper glanced to her right to see him turn up the headphones even further. She ignored him and faced forward.
I'm Juniper Reese. I've been class president 6 years running. 7 if I can find a way to beat Ben.
She smiled at him, and he returned the favor.
I love doing anything track-related, especially sprinting.
Juniper was very athletic. Her legs were very toned and muscular, her stomach tight.
I also like to tutor other people that might have a bit trouble with anything, so if anyone needs any help, don't hesitate to come to me. I've done it a lot over the years, so you'll be in good hands.
Miss Higgins smiled brightly. That was lovely of you to offer, Juniper, thank you. You may sit. Juniper grinned. Getting the first impression right was key for her, and she knew that she definitely made up for that embarrassing roll call mess-up. She glanced back to Kyler and saw that he turned his volume back down. She couldn't believe it. He turned up higher just for her so he wouldn't have to hear her talk. She was beginning to boil. She knew if she had to sit through an entire year of this, she would lose her mind. She began thinking of ways to try to persuade him to pay more attention, stop getting into fights, just stop being Kyler Queen, really. She thought of 1,000 things, and none of them seemed like they would break through the obnoxious, stubborn wall that was Kyler Queen. Miss Higgins passed out a class syllabus that required a guardian's signature. She began going over it, and everyone, except Kyler, was following along with her. She talked about all the topics they'd be going over in each subject over the first semester, and everyone pretty much agreed that it would be pretty fair. Juniper looked over at Kyler, whose feet were propped up on the desk, his eyes closed. He looked like he was sleeping, but she could tell that he was just silently ignoring his surroundings. She wished she knew why he pissed her off so much, but nothing came to mind. No other delinquents bothered her so much, even if he was worse.
Kyler, Miss Higgins said, I'm sure you're enjoying your music, but could you follow along for a short while?
Kyler pulled one of his earphones off his ear.
I said, could you follow along for a short while?
Kyler shrugged and put the earphone back on, continuing to ignore his teacher. The rest of the kids had split opinions on Kyler. Some hated him for being so difficult and unruly, and some of them were just scared of him because of his unpredictability and the ability to hurt people physically. They just stayed out of his way. No one stood up to him. But Juniper, on that day, did. She rose from her seat, grabbing something from her desk that she clutched in between her fingers. She walked over to the right side of Kyler's desk and stared down at him. He didn't even bother opening his eyes to see her. She pulled up what revealed to be scissors into view, put the blades on both sides of the headphone cord, and snapped the scissors quickly. You could hear a pin drop in the room. Juniper just cut Kyler's headphone cord without warning, without saying a word. She continued to stare down at him coldly. A few moments later, Kyler opened his eyes, obviously confused by the lack of sound. He grabbed the cord and saw that it was cut. He grabbed his phone and followed the cord along the headphone jack to see that it was cut as well. He looked up slowly, seeing Juniper there. He looked down at her hand to see scissors, and the look on his face was so blank and unamused that Juniper had no idea what he was thinking. Everyone looked back in shock, some in fear. They thought Juniper was done for. Kyler rose from his seat and removed the headphones from his head and the cord from his phone and wrapped them up. He turned around, walked to the back of the room, put the headphones in the trash can, and walked back to his seat. He sat down calmly, crossing his arms and leaning back once again. Juniper scowled.
That's it? No uproar? No kicking desks over? Where's that temper I've heard that's only gotten worse over the years?
Kyler only rolled his eyes and didn't say a word. Juniper scoffed and walked back to her seat.
Sorry, Miss Higgins. Please continue.
Miss Higgins gathered herself quickly.
Well, I thank you for helping him remove the headphones. I think you could have done that in a better way.
With all due respect, Ben said softly, there wasn't another way, period. Juniper looked over at him and smiled. She was happy he had her back, especially since Kyler was a very old friend of his. Miss Higgins nodded.
Very well, then, she said hesitantly. Eric Rooney?
Juniper took a deep sigh, letting her head rest on her desk. Another long day completely moved through. The bell had rung minutes before, and no one left quicker than Kyler. He seemed he had one leg out in the aisle, ready to go. Juniper also hated the idea of people not taking education seriously. This was a delinquent school, but that didn't necessarily mean that they had to dismiss their futures just because the work bored them. Noelle scratched the back of Juniper's head affectionately.
Come on, Sleepy, she said gently. Get your short ass up. It's only the first day and you're already energy dry.
Juniper smiled, her eyes still closed.
How can I not sleep when I'm getting a scalp massage?
Noelle grinned and poked her in the kidney gently. Juniper squealed and rose to her feet.
You know I hate that, she said with a slight giggle.
Noelle shrugged as if she didn't do anything wrong.
Don't show your weak points. You ready?
Juniper picked up her bag and nodded.
Yeah, let's go.
Juniper and Noelle walked through the hall, and it was very quickly emptying. The school had a strict policy of no students being there 30 minutes after the final bell, so it was best to get going as soon as you could. Juniper hated this. She wanted to stay and help anyone she could. Juniper was the school all-star. Everyone loved her. She wasn't snobby. She just didn't know how to let people fail without trying to help. Noelle yawned.
What are you doing after school, June?
Juniper shrugged.
I don't know. Play tennis with Jeff, maybe? He has a competition coming up and he needs practice. Wow, he must be getting pretty good. Last I saw him play, he could barely serve correctly. Yeah, well, I've been giving him some lessons over the past few months. Jesus, June, is there anything you can't do? Reach things on high shelves?
Anything personality-wise?
Accepting that I can't reach things on high shelves.
June and Noelle walked out the front gate, started fanning themselves from the sudden heat.
So, Noelle started shyly, that Ben guy is kind of cute and smart too. What do you think?
Juniper blushed and laughed.
I'm not looking for love, Noelle. If you think he's so cute, you go after him.
Noelle grinned.
Live a little, sweetie. Seriously, you even had your first kiss yet? I'm saving it for someone special. June, it's not your virginity. Go get a little tipsy at a party and give a guy a lip lock. It's not that hard.
June smiled.
I just don't operate that way, I guess.
June checked her bag, quick for a ball cap that she always kept on her. She hated the sun. She found it and put it on, but noticed her folder was missing.
Oh, damn it. June, naughty girl, watch that mouth of yours, Noelle joked. Oh, shut up. I forgot my folder on my desk. You think I got time to get it? Oh, gee, I don't know, track star. See if you can get it. But hey, I'm gonna get going. I promised my mom I'd help cook tonight. I'll see you tomorrow, okay?
Noelle walked off, waving. June returned the wave. She closed her pack and turned around, walking toward the front gate, and then froze. Fear overcame her, as she could feel the sweat instantly begin to form. It was Kyler. Kyler stood in front of her, 15 feet away. Juniper gasped for air, gulping. She remembered what she did, but she didn't think of the consequences. Kyler and June hated each other, but June was smart enough to know that she should be afraid of him. She then noticed he was marching towards her, his backpack open, his hands in his pockets. June took a step back, then another. Kyler looked irritated that June was getting away, so he removed his hands from his pocket and picked up his pace. So June did what she did better than anyone. She ran. June immediately turned her cap backwards, turned around and bolted. She could tell that Kyler was caught off guard because she glanced back for half a moment to see him gawk, and then he started sprinting after her. June went wide-eyed and looked forward. She knew she had to get away. She turned the corner, finding the first busy street. She ran down the sidewalk, carefully dodging people as she passed. "Excuse me, sorry, please move," she shouted as politely as she could. She accidentally bumped a man with coffee a little too hard, and he spilled it on himself. He yelped in surprise and stared at her, running off. Then Kyler passed, knocking him over. June looked back to say sorry, but saw Kyler gritting his teeth, keeping up with her. She was in shock. No one could run as fast as her. She must have been moving at least 20 miles per hour. How could a regular kid run at that speed? She didn't have time to think about that. She had to keep moving. She got incredibly lucky and passed a crosswalk as the walk sign just as it ended. Kyler was surely stuck on the other side. She looked back and saw him sliding over the hood of a car to reach the other side of the sidewalk. "Are you kidding me?" she screamed. She looked forward to see another pole and just had enough time to narrowly dodge it. Kyler moved around the pole and continued his chase. He was running out of breath, and that's when June's training really kicked in. She was still at full strength. Sure, he was fast, faster than she thought, but he didn't have the energy to keep it up like she did. She decided that now was the time to pull a stunt. She quickly looked to her left to see the street completely empty. She saw cars coming and saw her chance. She quickly crossed the street before any cars came and got to the other side. Kyler was caught off guard and tried to follow, but the stream of cars hit just as he tried. He grunted angrily and kept running along the sidewalk. June couldn't keep this up forever, but she was getting close to her home. She decided to take a detour and ultimately get home faster. Kyler finally crossed the street, but June was far too ahead. She quickly turned to her left, cut through an alley, head up the fire escape onto the building tops, and hopped down the fire escape onto the building part that she lived in. She was going to make it, but then something terrible happened. The ladder to the fire escape was gone. She panicked, looking left and right for it, but she didn't find it. She quickly turned around the normal way, but was stopped in her tracks by a panting, sweaty, frustrated Kyler. June was trapped. She had no way of escaping, and Kyler didn't look too incredibly pleased to have to run after her. June kept backing up until she hit the brick wall. Her heart began to pound, her stomach shrunk, her eyes couldn't focus, her mind raced. What was he going to do to her? Hurt her? Worse? June was mortified. She didn't want him to be in her class, let alone chasing her into an alley. Kyler began stepping toward her, wiping the sweat off his brow with a sweatband. His arms laid at his side, still heavily breathing. June was beginning to fall into a panic attack. She couldn't breathe. She was desperate. "Wait, please," she begged, choking on her words. "Look, I know what I did. I'm sorry. I don't have an excuse. I shouldn't have done anything. I won't bother you again, okay? I'll mind my own business. Please don't hurt me. I'm sorry. She began crying profusely. Her tears began to pour out of fear of what he'd do. Kyler was then right in front of her, pulled his bag off his shoulder. He unzipped it, and June froze. She couldn't even panic anymore. She decided that he was going to pull out a gun and shoot her, or a knife and slit her throat. She couldn't decide what was going to happen. She closed her eyes and waited for a tragic death to come, as she knew there was nothing anyone could do. "Here." She laid against the wall, processing the words she had just heard. Did he just talk? Did Kyler truly just speak? She'd never heard him talk in all the years she'd known him. She opened her eyes to look at him. His gaze was hard, but it didn't speak of harm. He was still heavily breathing. She looked down at his hand and mentally gasped. It was her folder. She was going to go back for it, but then ran in a panic that could only mean that Kyler must have seen it, put it in his bag, and tried to deliver it to her. June ran in a panic. She must have made plenty of trouble for him. She instantly felt remorse.
Oh,
She choked out, wiping her tears.
thank you. Really.
He nodded, handing her the folder, and began walking away.
Hey,
She called out, still shaky.
listen, about what I said, I don't know what came over me, really. I'm really sorry.
He turned to face her. His green eyes showed a perfect blend of stoicness and irritation. You're not the first person to assume I was going to hurt them, and you won't be the last. Don't let it get to you.
Yeah, but...
You should probably get going. It's getting late. She checked her watch quickly.
What? It's only 4.
Well, yeah, but isn't that like past your bedtime? Her fear quickly faded back into irritation.
What?
She said, glaring at him. He shrugged. Just saying, kids shouldn't be out so late.
We're the same age.
You skipped to school. I've seen you do it.
Okay, firstly, I haven't done that in years. Secondly, what, you watch me or something?
Kyler turned to face her fully.
No, I caught you once or twice. And speaking of kids, don't you have, like, the worst temper ever? I heard you hit a guy because he stole your pen. It was my last pen, Kyler objected.
June scowled.
Oh, and I'm the kid. Please, check a mirror next time.
Whatever, he growled, turning around. You got your folder. I'm out of here. She watched him leave, irritated, but then remembered he didn't have to do that. Why did he?
Listen, again, thanks. You didn't have to do that.
He scoffed. I didn't care. Live over this way anyway. Not a big deal. He walked away without saying another word. She opened her folder to check for contents. They were all there. Something caught her eye. She looked closer. Her syllabus that required a signature from her parents was already signed. It read, "The Seed of Satan," and "Who do you think?"
Oh, that jerk!